Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for the Remnant Forum. In a recent telephone interview with BuzzFeed News, Cardinal Raymond Burke noted that the extraordinary Synod on the Family, which has just finished in Rome, seems to have been designed to weaken the Church's teaching and practice with the apparent blessing of Pope Francis, end quote. Strong and harsh words indeed. Question is it true? Was the Synod taken over by a Ryan group or by liberals or this and that when the poor Pope was being abused? Or is this, in fact, Pope Francis's baby going exactly according to schedule?
To label people as you are living in sin, you are intrinsically disordered, and you have a contraceptive mentality does not help in bringing people to Christ and helping them to embrace the teaching of the Church.
Chris Ferrara joins us from his home in Virginia. Chris, how you doing this morning? Good morning.
Well, it's a rainy day in Virginia, and I'm afraid it's a rainy day for the Holy Catholic Church.
Okay, you have an idea then what we're looking to talk about this morning. I think what I'm worried about is this idea that we're seeing, especially in some of the neo-Catholic television and blog sites, is that we have a victory here, Chris. And I just want to read you some headlines to make a point, then I want you to take it and run with it, because I think this is a really crucial moment. Talking about the Synod follow-up, of course. Talking about the final relatio as well. About the final relatio, the Voice of the Family organization, which kudos to them, by the way. Congratulations to Voice on the Family. They've done a terrific job. They've not been seduced. They've not been bomb-throwing either direction. They're just giving us the straight story. Their headline about the final relatio is Synod's final report fails to resolve confusion, says pro-family group. So that's sort of the more conservative Catholic news team on the ground is saying that. Pat Buchanan's headline yesterday is the price of papal popularity. It's an excellent column in which he raises the possibility that if Francis goes too much further in this direction, we need to start talking about an anti-pope. The Week has a headline that reads, Pope Francis's Machiavellian strategy to liberalize the Catholic Church. And, of course, Vatican Insider, which I've saved that for last because it's the spookiest one, and I think it gets to the point we want to talk about today. Francis, Church has 1 year to mature. In the meantime, its doors are wide open. And this is Vatican Insider. Chris, it seems like everybody realizes this is just the opening act. This is far from over. This is Francis's baby, and we got a year to ram this through.
Well, let's stop deluding ourselves. This is a pope that is determined to bring about revolutionary changes in the discipline of the Church. There's no other way to construe what happened at this synod. Let's talk about what the synod was in terms of documents. First, you had the interim relatio. That was the preliminary report. Then you had the final relatio. The interim relatio was not leaked to the press, as the neo-Catholic normalists would have us believe. It was announced to the press. It was a scheduled event for publication. That interim relatio was put up on the Vatican website as an official document corresponding to the synod's deliberations, and the bishops were not given an opportunity to critique it. Why? Because this was the Pope's document. How do we know it was the Pope's document? Go over to EWTN. That's a nice mainstream source. Robert Royal tells Raymond Arroyo that on Saturday, the day before the document was published on the Vatican website, October 13, 2014, by the way, the miracle of the Son of Fatima happened on that date, that the Pope read the document on Saturday and approved it for publication on Monday. This was not a press leak. This was an official act of what I call the secret synod. Why do I call it the secret synod? Because it was all done in secret. The bishops were not allowed to reveal their interventions to the public. We weren't allowed to know which bishop was saying what, which cardinal was saying what. The whole thing was shrouded in secrecy. Why? Because what they wanted to do, and by they I mean the Pope and those he put in charge of this synod, could not be done openly. Now, let's look at the interim relatio. The interim relatio, to the scandal of the Catholic world, says, and I quote, homosexuals have gifts and qualities to offer the Christian community. Are we capable of welcoming these people, guaranteeing them a fraternal space in our communities? As homosexuals, Michael, as homosexuals. It goes on to say, often they wish to encounter a church that offers them a welcoming home. Are our communities capable of providing that, accepting and valuing their sexual orientation without compromising Catholic doctrine on the family and matrimony? Well, this is completely monstrous. We know it's monstrous.
I want to stop you there for just a second because they didn't. No one has apologized for that. People are all happy that they've backed away from it. Isn't it thrilling? The Pope and united with his bishops and his cardinals in the church, hasn't endorsed the homosexual lifestyle. Isn't that great? But Chris, nobody's apologized for it. And as you pointed out last week, the Pope is going to publish the same interim relatio. He didn't pull it away and say, don't see it.
Look, folks, don't kid yourself. This was the Pope's document from the beginning, and I would maintain, and it's clear from the way things unfolded here, that this document was, I hate to be melodramatic or to sound melodramatic, but this is actually the case. This document was the poison pill that the Synod was supposed to swallow. But it didn't swallow it. It regurgitated it. It vomited this thing up. This document, this interim relatio, goes on to say that the unions, so-called between homosexuals, offer precious support in the life of the partners. The same document says, well, we have to stop talking about the evils of cohabitation, in other words, shacking up, and look for the positive elements in these relationships. And we have to look for the positive elements in civil marriages. And we have to look for the positive elements in the lives of divorced and remarried Catholics. In other words, stop talking about sinful relations. Eliminate the impediment, effectively, of mortal sin in the area of sexual morality so that everybody has access to the sacraments. This interim document actually attempted to apply the law of gradualism, which, as John Paul II insisted, pertains only to progress in the spiritual life, to morality, suggesting that people who are sinning mortally, objectively speaking, should be allowed to receive the sacraments anyway, while they think over whether they're going to comply with the Church's teaching on marriage and procreation. Now, this interim document was superseded, as I said, vomited up by the Synod Fathers, who rebelled the following Thursday. What did the Pope do? He insisted that it be circulated to the world's bishops anyway, along with the final document. Another point, Michael, the final document has its own problems. There are 3 rather controversial paragraphs on the same subjects. They don't go nearly as far as the interim document that the Pope wanted to be published went, but they do open up areas of ambiguity while not endorsing homosexuality and certainly not endorsing cohabitation in terms of its positive elements. And those 3 controversial paragraphs did not receive a 2/3 majority of the Synod Fathers who were voting on each paragraph. And so those 3 paragraphs should have been excised from the final document. This was, after all, supposed to be a synod, in which the 2/3 majority would determine what goes into the synodal final report. What did the Pope do? Aside from demanding that the interim report with its scandalous material be circulated to the world's bishops, the report he read and approved before it was published, he insisted that those 3 paragraphs in the final report, which failed to gain acceptance, be included in the report. What's the net outcome of the Pope's meddling in this process? Cardinal Nichols said the Pope threw out the rule book. That's what Cardinal Nichols said. It's as if this synod never happened, and the whole reason for this dog and pony show was to insert ambiguity, confusion, and the outrages in the interim document into the life of the Church so that for the next year, everyone can be led to think that the Church is now open to homosexual unions, so-called, cohabitation, i.e. shacking up, the sacraments for the divorced and remarried. And then, as you pointed out, the Pope says, well, we have a year to mature. And then the Pope tells us, on the morning the outrageous interim report is released, that morning he gives a sermon introducing the God of surprises. Who is this God of surprises? I'll tell you who the God of surprises is. It's Pope Francis. And Pope Francis, we have to face reality here, is determined to ramrod through what would be catastrophic changes in the discipline of the Church. These are his documents. He wants them circulated, even though they were essentially, the 3 paragraphs in the final report and the interim report, rejected by the Synod.
Yeah.
Effectively, he doesn't care what the Synod decided.
No, that's it. Doesn't it remind you of something else? To me, it bears striking resemblance to Obamacare. We're getting this whether we want it or not. And it's just going to take a little time, but we're going to get it. Chris, I got the quote here. This is from the final relatio in the section about homosexuality, and I just want to read it and get your reaction. He says it reads, quote, men and women with homosexual tendencies must be welcomed with respect and gentleness. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. Okay, fine. But this, it used to be a sin that cried to heaven for vengeance. So would they say the same thing about, let's say, for example, pedophilia? Pedophilia must be welcomed. Any sign of discrimination against pedophiles must be avoided, must be rejected. So I think, I mean, what do you think? I think we're being seduced already. We're already sort of giving into this idea. It's not a sin anymore. It's just how do we pastorally handle it? When they use this kind of language, even when it's edited and been pulled back a little bit, we're still being lulled into accepting a whole new definition of this sin, which at one time cried to heaven for vengeance.
I ask a simple question. Since when did homosexuals become a protected class in the Roman Catholic Church? The Church does not accept homosexuals as homosexuals. The Church accepts sinners who are willing to repent and conform their lives to the teachings of the gospel. The Church doesn't distinguish between homosexuals and other sinners in the Church. Not until this Synod, at least. So now, for the next year, we're going to have special attention paid to homosexuals as a class, and this is completely outrageous. Do you know what Archbishop Chaput said? The Archbishop of Philadelphia, one of the top 5 sees in the United States. He said this Synod has sowed confusion in the Church, and that confusion is of the devil. That's Archbishop Chaput. And whose Synod is this? Let's not kid ourselves. This is the Synod of Francis. Full stop.
No, that's it. And if you think, Chris, on what we're hearing from princes of the church, such as Chaput, such as Burke, such as Cardinal Burke, such as Mueller, what they're saying, something terrible has happened. This was a scandal. This harmed the church. But no one, Chris, no one's apologizing for this fiasco of a synod so far. Even though now it's been sort of taped back together a little bit. Where's the apology for the fact that we now have a de facto conversation at the highest levels of the church with the blessing of the Holy Father that are saying outrageous things about homosexuality, according to Cardinal Burke, according to Cardinal Chaput, outrageous things about divorced and remarried, about adultery. The discussion's already happening. I don't understand how we can separate that reality, because that's all that Joe Sixpack is thinking about. These things are now up for debate at the highest levels of the church. Where's the apology? There is an apology. They're still talking about the grand and glorious synod that they're going to ram through now for the next year.
Well, yeah, again, this was planned, and as Cardinal Burke said, this synod seems to have been arranged. This is Cardinal Burke, the head of the Apostolic Signatura. This synod seems to have been arranged to weaken the church's discipline in the area of sexual morality. Arranged to do that. And anyone who denies that this synod was arranged is ignoring what happened at the synod when Cardinal Pell literally slammed his fist on the podium and said, the manipulation of this synod must stop. Who was manipulating it? The Pope, and let us face it, the progressivist cabal that he put in charge of this whole operation. Now that I've thoroughly scandalized everybody by saying what I've said, let's put it into historical perspective. We are dealing with, I'm sorry, a wayward Pope. We have to face that reality. The church has had wayward popes before. We've had a Pope Honorius, we've had a Pope Liberius, we've had a Pope John the 22nd. Your own newspaper ran a multi-part series on the outrage that John the 22nd provoked when he tried to deny the immediacy of the beatific vision, undermining the church's entire teaching on the suffrages for souls in purgatory, which would release those souls immediately into the beatific vision. That was a catastrophic error on the part of John the 22nd. But it's small potatoes compared to what's going on now in terms of confusion in the church. To suggest that the Catholic Church could even countenance welcoming homosexuals as homosexuals and valuing their sexual orientation, to suggest that we must now ignore the sin involved in cohabitation and the public adultery of divorced and so-called remarried Catholics and focus on the good elements in those relationships. This is a catastrophe far greater than any dispute over the doctrine pertaining to the beatific vision. And yet John the 22nd provoked furious opposition from theologians and prelates of the Catholic Church in the 1300s. We're facing the same situation today. Worse, we're facing a situation, Michael, that's like that at the time of the Arian heresy, when even the Pope, Pope Liberius, affirmed the excommunication of St. Athanasius, who was defending the divinity of Christ at a time when massive numbers of Catholics, almost the entire church, had effectively become a kind of Jehovah's Witness. And here's the Pope affirming the excommunication of St. Athanasius, one of the greatest saints in church history. So you shouldn't be scandalized by this, except to the extent that scandal is called for, that we stand up and say to the Pope, you're wrong, but it should not affect your faith in the indefectibility of the church. The Pope is not indefectible. The Pope can make errors of prudential judgment, and even as we've seen in church history, errors of doctrine which have to be corrected. It's the church that will not defect. The Pope may have to be opposed. And some prelates are doing that right now.
No, that's it, Chris. Well said. That's precisely it, because now we're getting involved. When you think of how this pontificate began, when you think of who am I to judge, and the constant ongoing attack against those who are too rigorous, those who are traditionalists with respect to doctrine and dogma in the church, the rules of the church, the idea that we're supposed to pretend that the Holy Father is not trying to make a change here, I think makes the conservative Catholics, makes them look ridiculous. We know what's going on. The world press knows what's going on. The press headlines with respect to the final document of the Synod was spun as a defeat for Pope Francis. They're on his side. They're on his side.
The Pope suffers setback in outreach to gays. That's the subject of the headlines. But that's obviously what was going on. Again, that midterm relatio, which basically says that we should value the homosexual orientation. And please don't give me this nonsense about the mistranslation of the Italian verb valutare. The verb means to value or appreciate. There's a tertiary sense of assessing, but the sentence in question says accept and value, not accept and evaluate. Accept and value the homosexual orientation. And it turns out that was written by Archbishop Bruno Forte, a pro-gay prelate. And we've also learned that only 2 or 3 out of all the Synod fathers even raised this section, the subject of the acceptance of homosexual orientation as such. And we read today that 2 out of those 3 were quoting Francis and raising it. Now, I don't know what the Pope's motives are, but we certainly know where he's going with this.
No, and
to deceive people, as the normalists are doing, by saying this was just some cabal of liberals who, unknown to the Pope, leaked the interim report to the press, is doing a terrible disservice to the body of Christ. It's that simple.
It's doing a terrible disservice, Chris, and it's also disingenuous to some extent, because if you believe the Pope can't be questioned, what we have to face, the reality that these journalists, quote unquote, need to face, is that Pope Francis may be right. Just for a second, let's entertain that absurd possibility that he may be right. It's time to change the church's rules on adultery. It's time to change the church's rules on homosexuality and homosexuals. So in the very idea of making the Pope, to disassociate him from this synod and from the worst aspects of it, they're actually silencing the Pope. This is not the loyal thing for a church to. Maybe we should give him a hearing. If this is what Pope Francis wants, to liberalize the church in the area of morality, and he can't make a mistake to such an extent that we cannot even criticize him, we have an obligation then to hear him out, don't we?
That's an excellent point. These normalists are basically pretending that the Pope hasn't said what he said. And in effect, they're disobeying the Pope. If what they really say is true, that we must follow the Pope and refrain from criticizing what he does because the Pope is effectively Christ, not the vicar of Christ.
Yeah.
Then why aren't they advocating what Francis is advocating? I'll tell you why, because they know it's wrong. And yet we saw one of these normalists on television yesterday or today groveling by way of apology for having reported what Cardinal Burke said, that the Pope was harming the church with this synod and with the interim relatio and with the whole process. A prince of the church, the head of the apostolic signature, said this. This normalist made the mistake, he calls it, of simply reporting what the cardinal said. Yeah. And then he spent 15 minutes groveling, essentially telling us to cover up what the Pope has done.
Oh,
that's not what a Catholic is meant to do. This prince of the church honored his vow as a cardinal to defend the faith. And we have to do the same within our limited competence, according to our stations in life as Catholics. We have a duty to do that.
No, Chris, we're out of time, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this is the harsh reality in which we live at the moment, and you're not going to see any apologizing here from Remnant TV. I'm sorry. This, in my opinion, and I'm just a humble layman, but what I've seen so far, Chris, the scandal, the fact that I'm now hiding statements from the Pope so my children don't see it, This could very well be the worst pope in history. And we're not going to back down. So just like Cardinal Burke is not backing down, a lot of great men, a lot of great journalists, even EWTN now is like, hold on a second, what's going on? We got to do the same thing.
I agree.
Yeah. That'll do it for us, folks. Please visit the Remnant website, remnantnewspaper.com. I'm Michael Matt for the Remnant Forum, and we'll see you next time.